He hunts for food and companionship, but a companion he won't find, for the Sasquatch is a dying breed, the last one of its kind, soon to slip into folklore, a myth hardly worth a mention. This wild man of the forest, born of alternate dimension. You're listening to Carolina Haints. Welcome, dear listeners, to the Carolina Haints podcast, brought to you by Wreak Havoc Productions and A Darker World. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. Kaser is a small town in Cleveland County, North Carolina, a few miles west of Charlotte. It's a very small town. In 2010, a man named Tim Peeler called the sheriff's department to report that he had seen a Bigfoot. Now, I know what you're thinking. Didn't we already do a Bigfoot episode in season 2? We sure did. But a listener pointed out that we didn't specifically talk about this particular Bigfoot. So, yes, dear listener, if you know of a story that we haven't covered, feel free to email the show with your suggestions. If we can find enough information about it, then who knows, maybe you'll hear your story on the podcast. It was around 3 a.m. on June 5th, 2010. Tim was watching TV when he heard a commotion in the woods that bordered his property. It sounded like some coyotes were fighting down in the holler. They were riling his dogs up, which were kennelled that night because one of them was in heat. Tim thought maybe his predator collar would calm the coyotes down. Now, for those of you who don't know, a game call is designed to mimic the sound of an animal. They can sound like a predator to scare prey animals into the hunter's ambush. Or they may sound like a prey animal, meant to lure in larger prey. And that's the kind that Tim was using. Now, personally, I have no idea why he would want to lure what sounded like a pack of coyotes to him. But he thought it would help. And something answered. A couple minutes later, a huge, hairy, bipedal creature stepped out of a small break in the woods. Tim wasn't much concerned at the creature's size, or the fact that he had no idea what it was, but he was concerned that it was making a beeline for his dogs. There wasn't enough time for him to go to his gun cabinet. He grabbed his walking stick, a spotlight, and ran to cut it off. He stood in the creature's path and turned on his spotlight. What he saw there caught him off guard, but he stood his ground. Tim described what he saw in great detail. He said it was
10 foot tall,
pale-skinned, covered in blondish, grayish hair. It had a very human-looking face, with a beard that reached all the way to its waist. And he said it had a human nose, not like a gorilla nose. He said it had 6 fingers on each hand, feet as big as an elephant, and it smelled like a wet skunk. Oh, and he also remarked about its...
He had beautiful hair.
But Tim stood his ground. He poked the creature with his walking stick and told it in no uncertain terms,
Get away from here. And he went right back out that path again.
It left through the same opening in the woods that it had entered. And as it did, Tim noticed that the top of its head grazed one of the tree branches. Later, Tim would measure the height of that branch at 9 feet tall. Tim immediately ran back inside and called the sheriff's department.
Cleveland County 911.
He practically begged them to send an officer out to his place. He said that he was afraid that he would be forced to shoot it if it didn't leave his dogs alone. He said that he really didn't want to have to do that because after looking the creature in its eyes, it looked so human.
It looked like a giant ape with a man's face.
That statement stood out to me because it's something you hear in many Bigfoot sightings, especially one made by hunters. I've heard several stories about hunters having Bigfoot in their sights, but being unable to pull the trigger once they've looked into his eyes, once they've seen how human the face seems to be. Now, if you're a repeat listener of the show, then you might know that we are simply storytellers. We don't pass judgment of the truth of the stories we tell. We simply relay them to you as we've heard them, and we don't typically offer our personal opinions. But Tim's statement to the sheriff's department got me thinking. There's a theory that Bigfoot may be some sort of interdimensional being, and that could be one of the reasons why no one's ever found the remains of one. Now, I don't know about that, but just from the sheer number of people who have said they couldn't bring themselves to shoot it once they saw the humanity of the beast, it makes me wonder if looking into its eyes has some sort of hypnotic effect, making you lose interest in causing harm. Far-fetched maybe, but so is the notion that there could be a vast community of 10-foot tall creatures spread out from coast to coast that have gone almost entirely unnoticed by the general population. Anyway, I'm sure you're eager to hear more about Tim. As soon as he hung up the phone, he heard his dogs barking again. He looked out, and it was back, standing over the dog kennel. He grabbed his walking stick and ran out to shoo it away. Again, it went right back through the same opening in the woods. Soon after that, a sheriff's deputy arrived and parked in Tim's driveway straight across from the opening. Tim believes that the only reason it didn't come back a third time is because it saw the flashing lights of the deputy's car. Tim told the deputy his story. The same story I just told you. It didn't change. Not a single word. In fact, Tim's story hasn't changed in the 11 years since. He hasn't added to it or embellished it. And he hasn't toned it down for people who ridiculed him. It's always stayed exactly the same, right down to the
Beautiful hair.
The deputy calmly listened to the story and barely reacted. You see, it wasn't the first time he had heard of a Bigfoot in Cleveland County. Back in 1978, many sightings of a Bigfoot that they named Knobby was reported. Since then, no official reports have been made, but that doesn't mean the deputy hadn't heard several unofficial ones over the years. Like I said, it started in December of 1978. The residents of Cleveland County began to report sightings of a Bigfoot-type creature around Carpenter's Knob, a peak just north of the town of Kings Mountain. Because it was generally seen around Carpenter's Knob, the locals called the creature Knobby. The first sighting was near Christmas, when 88-year-old Minnie Cook ventured into her backyard and saw a huge black hairy creature. She described it as a 6-foot-tall hairy creature with a small head and flat face. Shortly after Minnie had her encounter, Bill was found with his neck broken. Bill, as everyone in the area knew, was the goat over at the Price farm. Price said that a few days earlier, something had spooked his animals. His mule even broke his rope and ran off. He reported seeing footprints and hearing screams in the night, but he wasn't sure what to make of it. And then came the morning when Bill was found dead.
I didn't see what happened, and I don't know how it happened. All I know is that something just killed the hell out of old Bill. And now I gotta go get me another goat.
The Gastonian Gazette was filled with stories about Knobby for the next few weeks, but people were divided on what they had actually seen. Some people swore it was a Bigfoot. Others were just as sure that it was nothing more than a bear. And some people admitted they had simply had no idea what they had seen. But they had definitely seen something. Even those who believed the creature was a bear couldn't deny the sounds that were being heard. A, quote, wailing in the night like a woman in pain, end quote. Jim Hollingsworth, a developer for the state park system, investigated the claims. He interviewed several eyewitnesses and said,
"The description surprised me. They described it as a sound that varies in pitch from a low growl to a high scream, almost like a bull bellowing, but with its own sound. They also say that after it screams for a few seconds, it has a yodeling type sound.
Hollingsworth was an amateur Bigfoot hunter who had spent time up and down both coasts looking for the elusive cryptid. He played a tape of suspected Bigfoot sounds from California to witnesses of Knobby, and they all agreed that the two are quite similar. Most of the reported sightings ended in early 1979, but they had left an indelible mark on the sleepy little town. And not a very good mark. The town had been overrun by hunters and curious onlookers, all vying for a glimpse of the creature. And everyone that can make a buck on Knobby has made a buck on Knobby. A couple of years ago, one of the two country stores in the area claimed that after 40 years, Knobby t-shirts still make up about a quarter of their total sales. And then there was the media backlash. Cleveland County became the laughingstock of the country. So much so that the town council had advised anyone who saw the Bigfoot known as Knobby to keep it to themselves. And until Tim Peeler, everyone had. As expected, Tim's report came under heavy scrutiny, and in the age of the internet, it was worse than ever. Jimmy Fallon even did a skit based on Tim on his TV show. They ridiculed his report, of course, but they also ridiculed his accent, his lifestyle, and all of Cleveland County. And still, Tim Peeler never wavered from his story. You can learn more about this story by checking out bigfootsasquatch.wordpress.com and bigfootencounters.com.
My name I don't remember, though I hail from Ohio.
Special thanks to our good friend Chad Hunt for lending his vocal talents to this episode.
What took me from my home?
This episode was researched and written by Jeffrey Cochran and was produced and hosted by me, Dan Sellers. You can find everything Jeff's up to at his company at adarkerworld.com. You can find everything that we're up to at recapitproductions.com. Be sure to support our upcoming film, Seer of Souls, on Indiegogo. It's written and directed by Jeff and is a co-production between our two companies. We could seriously use your support and would love for you to be involved.
But never did I hear one thing hit the ground.
You can find our book, Carolina Haints, Ghost, Folklore, and Mysteries of the Old North State, available in bookstores now. You can find every episode of the Carolina Haints podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. Or you can listen directly from the feed at carolinahaints.libsyn.com. You can find everything about Carolina Haints, the show, and the book at our website, carolinahaints.com.
So I got out my ropes and a rusty.
Be sure to like the official Facebook page at facebook.com/CarolinaHaints. I'm on Instagram at Wreak Havoc Productions, and I'm on Twitter at Hank vs. the Undead. As always, you can send us your questions or suggestions directly at wreakhavocproductions@gmail.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. Tune in then to hear more about those things that go bump in the night.
The last rope